بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Brothers, sisters, friends, and welcome to this live stream. With me today we have Shaykh Hisham. Just a quick bio. Shaykh Hisham Jafar Ali is an engineer by profession and a Muslim chaplain at the University of Nottingham. He studied Arabic and the Islamic sciences in the UAE for a number of years, where he received a higher diploma in Arabic and Islamic sciences and was appointed Khatib at the age of 17. Alhamdulillah. So it's very good to have you here, Shaykh Hisham. How are you?
Alhamdulillah, I'm not a sheikh, but it's lovely to be here on your platform. Lovely to
So
speak.
it's a pleasure, it's an honor for you to be here. Now we're going to be talking about sharing Islam. We're going to be talking about doubts. We're going to be talking about how to deal with doubts and all the relevant topics that revolve around those themes. So the first thing that I want to talk about is, please give us some of your experiences on campus, because I know you've dealt with many students at the University of Nottingham concerning Iman, faith-related issues, concerning doubts, concerning certainty. Just give us your overall experience and maybe a particular experience that opened the door in order for you to get involved in these issues and take them more seriously. I believe there was someone who committed suicide, but I leave that to you to tell the audience.
Yeah, so the overview, Hamza, it's a good question to start off with. The overview is, so as chaplain at the University of Nottingham, large part of my responsibility is talking to students, and we wouldn't call it counseling, but be able to just have a chat with them, whether it's something emotional they're struggling with, something faith-related they're struggling with. And usually the chaplain is not really equipped for a higher education environment. So chaplains usually are in prisons and hospitals, where they lead the salah, deal with bereavement, emotional trauma, things like that. But in a higher education environment, the challenge is not about leading salah, and it's not really about emotional trauma. The real challenge is the intellectual challenge, is the challenge of doubt. And having been a chaplain now for just over a year, and also having traveled to other Islamic societies and other campuses in the UK, I've noticed that it's a rampant problem. It's rife, but it's also suppressed. It's under the cover. And so the overview of the problem is that when I started chaplaincy, I was quite shocked to realize that the people who were coming to me to deal with doubts in the basic tenets of Islam were people who were bearded, sisters who were wearing the hijab, visibly practicing Muslims, but there is an invisible burden on their shoulders and something that's consuming their minds. Some people think this is only true for students who are studying philosophy, and everybody else is immune. Actually, it's not. It's the climate that we live in. They can't go a day without, in some way, shape, or form, being exposed to other ideologies, other belief systems. And obviously, the question then comes like, am I a Muslim because of birth? Am I Muslim by culture or by choice? And when they start questioning all of their initial assumptions, they realize I actually don't know. I don't know why I'm a Muslim. And that's when the kind of the trauma begins. That's when the shock begins. So some of them, I've had students that leave their courses, drop out of university, starting with the intellectual doubts. I've had students who stopped wearing the hijab, just starting with a doubt. And so it starts with one doubt, one thought, one idea, and it festers, it becomes a cancer, it spreads, it consumes them. Sometimes the issue is a lot less. So it's just a question someone has, they need an answer. Once you give them the answer, they're fine. Other times, people ask a question, you give them an answer, and they've got another question, another, and another. And now those questions are eating their minds in salah, they can't focus. They're crying. One particular practicing student, he couldn't even study for his exams in the library because it's like someone was talking to him in his head about doubts related to Islam. So one thing for sure coming out of that is it's wrong to say that these are just intellectual problems. There's a psychological aspect there. There's a spiritual aspect there. There's an emotional aspect there. So like one pattern I noticed is students who had like emotional trauma growing up, they tend to be more susceptible to these kinds of doubts. They tend to feel a bit more lost when they become separate from their families. And one particular incident, the one you referred to, which is possibly one of the most shocking ones, is a Muslim student who committed suicide, and his family will give me permission to share the story. But his Muslim student who committed suicide, and I know that what started it all off was a doubt, the feeling that practicing Muslim, praying salah, etc., etc. I don't know why I'm doing it. Some non-Muslim colleague asked him a question about the faith. He doesn't know the answer to it, and that's how it all begins. The problem is not knowing what to do with the doubt. So starting with a doubt, it becomes a cancer. And when you live your entire life seeing the world in a particular way, suddenly that worldview shatters. You're in a vacuum. You've got nothing, and you've got nothing to lose. And if I happen to come from like a difficult home, an abusive family, etc., etc., nowhere to go back home to, and no peace of mind where he is, he decided to take his life.
So would you say
And
from your, yeah,
yeah,
sorry. So
go ahead.
would you say from your experience on campus and dealing with students on a kind of grassroots campus perspective, what would be the kind of, I mean, percentage is a wrong term to use, but the kind of, I don't know, let's use the word percentage of Muslim students that would have what you would call a doubts concerning the Islamic tradition?
I would say a conservative estimate would be one third. A
One third.
conservative estimate would be one third of Muslims have doubts about their faith, that they don't have the confidence to ask, they don't know who to go to, and they kind of just push it aside, thinking, "I'll eventually deal with it, or I'll get there."
Okay. So
But
this,
it's affected them already.
yeah, so this leads us to a really interesting point now. So let's really define what we mean by doubt here. Because in the Islamic tradition, there is a difference between kind of psycho-spiritual whisperings and genuine intellectual doubts. So I'm assuming you've used the word doubt to encompass both, but let's now allow you to elaborate on the difference between the two.
Sure. Um, and we've seen this quite often where a doubt turns into psycho-spiritual whisper. But to just make a distinction between them, a doubt is something you're not sure of, and the dangerous ones are when you're not sure about something very fundamental to Islam. You're not sure of whether God exists or not. Or you're not sure is Muhammad the Prophet or not. A doubt is different from a question. A question is, why did so and so happen in the Islamic tradition, in Islamic history? But I still retain my beliefs, my morals and values haven't changed. But when you're not sure anymore about those initial values, that's when it becomes doubt. Um, on the other hand, psychospiritual whisperings, or what we call waswasah in Arabic, is when it's not just something you're just not sure of, but you're able to go on with your daily life. It's when that question that you had or the thing you're not sure about eventually takes over your mind, so to speak. You hear almost a whispering in your head. You knock one, you find the answer to one down, only to get another one popping up, and it's constant. It's bothering you. It's consuming you, and that I find that it starts with a doubt, and a doubt not dealt with then becomes a cancerous waswasa or psychospiritual.
Okay, so the distinction that's being made here is there's doubts about something that you're unsure of, that you have a question about, and it refers, generally speaking, to the kind of foundational aspects of Islam that would change the basis of your value system, the basis of your worldview. Those are serious doubts.
Yeah.
And that's slightly different from having a question about something like, I want to know about the preservation of hadith. Okay, not really knowing the answer at this moment doesn't really affect my foundational worldview. It doesn't affect my value system. I still have yaqeen. I still have certainty in Islam. It's just a question I'm going to explore intellectually and spiritually, and I'm going to access the tradition to find an answer, which is very different to, I doubt the foundational aspects of the tradition, like God's existence, the miracle of the Qur'an, the prophethood of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and other aspects, including the 6 pillars of Iman, right? And then you said the psycho-spiritual doubt is the waswas that overcomes you. It basically engulfs you, and you don't have an answer, and that really basically fundamentally destroys your kind of spiritual and your psychological well-being.
And it's not just intellectual. That's one more distinction.
Yes.
That the waswasa, it's something that you could have answered that question before. Like, I know the answer to this question, but it keeps bugging me psychologically.
Yes.
Yeah. So
can we also say there is light at the end of the tunnel, even when it comes to things like waswas, because the Sahaba, they would complain to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and say, they had things that come in their mind that they didn't want to utter, right? And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam basically said to them, this is a sign of Iman. So there is another type of waswasa, which is, well, maybe you shouldn't call it waswasa, because it's not something that's really it's not
Not
destroying
necessarily
your
sinister. It's
being.
not necessarily something sinister, right? Like
Yes.
some thoughts you have, you just would never share with anyone because
So,
you
so yeah, so
something.
it's like kind of a mental whispering, a mental psychological
Yeah,
whispering. The
yeah,
Sahaba, they had them too. However, they had a distinction. They made a distinction between the mental spiritual whispering and who they were. They said, we don't like this. We don't believe
mm,
in this. We know it's wrong, but it's come in our minds. We're not going to say anything. We're not going to act on it. And that's why the Prophet said, this is a sign of Iman. Now, when it comes to unhealthy mental spiritual whisperings, it's when you start to adopt those mental spiritual whisperings and it engulfs you and destroys you from that, destroys your well being. And I like to give a picture sometimes that it's like your mind is like a sky and there are clouds. Now, the clouds, they're not you, right? They're not part of
yeah.
your mind per se. Just let them drift past. So the Sahaba knew, look, that cloud, that mental spiritual whispering, which I know is fundamentally wrong. I know it's not from me, and I have a psychological. I don't like it, right? So
Yeah.
I don't like that whispering. It's not part of me. I know how to answer it, but it's still in my head, and I'm not going to talk about it because I know I'm making the distinction. You have this kind of what's that word to use? You
Got a
don't like it.
boundary. It's external, right?
Yeah,
You
it's
got
external, but they also hate it because they know it's false. They know it's not of them, from them.
yes.
It's a kind of mental, spiritual whispering, and they just let it go past. So let the cloud just drift away. When it comes to kind of the whispering that you were talking about, is when you now think that cloud is you and it starts
Yeah.
to rain. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
and
then,
frequently what happens is that once you start internalizing it and saying these are my thoughts, and the next question is how could I be thinking such a thing?
yes,
You begin to doubt your very like existence, your nature, your morality. Like, am I a good person? How could I be thinking this about, how could I not be sure about the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, his integrity?
yeah,
Me as a Muslim. So when you start hating yourself, is when it all is. That's when the black hole turns up and everyone gets sucked in. Because when it becomes self-loathing, it becomes a vicious cycle. You hate yourself for the thought. You don't know how to solve it. You get another thought. You hate the thought. You hate yourself, and you become in this spiral, this downward spiral of just self-loathing, and not knowing how to get out of that pit.
yeah. That's very interesting. And it's actually quite sad as well because you can imagine that person is just in this, you know, this quagmire, this darkness, and they don't know how to get out of it. So before we go into the solutions, then what are the sources of these type of doubts? What do you think are the sources of the spiritual type of doubts, the waswasah? What do you think are the sources of the kind of intellectual doubts, the fundamental type of doubts? From your
Yeah.
experience, what would they be?
So partly, like one thing I've had to come to accept is that we live in the global village, where if your heart or your mind is a bucket, right, it's raining, right? It's raining, and you've filled your bucket with some basic morals and values, but everyone's throwing their bit as well. So you can't really avoid being exposed, um, even possibly being exposed to people attacking your fundamental beliefs. And one of the unfortunate realities is that we're not prepared for that, in terms of upbringing and childhood. So one of the things you mentioned to me before in previous conversation is why don't parents talk to their children about why we worship Allah? And if a parent were to arm their child with such a mentality, a mindset, when it starts raining, they have an umbrella, so to speak, to go with the analogy. So one of the sources is climate. We have a climate of, especially in Europe, coming straight after the Renaissance and the European Revolution, and etc., a source. We have a climate of doubt, of being a skeptic in anything established, being skeptic in religion. Religion is old school. The institution of religion, it's not in line with science, not in line with modernity. So when you grow up in this environment, you can't help but having some of those thoughts fest in the back of your mind. That's one source, the climate or the environment. And then another source is, you know, uh, people getting involved in conversations, interfaith conversations, that they're not ready to have. So, people going on a dawah store and they're armed with their kind of basic questions, but they're not armed for certain types of discussions. And so someone brings up something they haven't come across before, and that begins to fester in their mind. So there's sometimes the extra involvement in dawah when a person isn't ready. And with students in particular, one of the greatest sources of doubt is YouTube. I would say, from my anecdotal experience, no survey, but I would say 80 to 90% of doubts students come across. People aren't really reading books nowadays, especially at that age group. They're more on Instagram, Snapchat, YouTube. It's the YouTube suggestion playlist that is the greatest source of doubts,
Really?
in my humble opinion, in my little experience.
Fun.
It's obviously conversations with colleagues and friends, coming into contact with non-Muslims. Maybe they grew up in a sheltered environment. Non-Muslim ask them a question about their faith. They don't know how to respond, and that's where it begins. But the majority of the time, going to YouTube and kind of getting bits and bats about the faith, and not having a structured worldview, and not having anybody build their blocks, but getting random bits of information, sometimes which confuse them further. So they learn a bit about Islam's relationship with slavery, and they're like, that just raises more questions in my mind now. It's not really settled me.
Mm.
So I'd say in summary, it's the climate we live in, it's the upbringing of parents, the lack of a foundation, it's YouTube and content, and it's also just being in contact with the wider world, with colleagues and other people in society.
So that would be basically the source of maybe intellectual type of doubts
Yeah.
about the tradition itself. So it's the social media aspect, YouTube, it's the environment, kind of global village we live in. We live in a kind of, marketplace of competing ideologies and values and ideas, and it's inevitable that we're going to have these questions. Okay, so that's one source. What about the source of the type of the waswasah? Like you alluded to it earlier about relationship with parents, maybe not having a good grounding at home, maybe they don't have a good connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they don't pray, for example. So give us some of those type of sort of doubts.
And I would say that the waswasah aspect is perhaps the most really dangerous in the sense of how it impacts a person's entire life. I've seen two broad sources of waswasah in my conversations. Like, somebody comes, they have like serious doubt, they don't even know why they exist, existential pain, they don't know why they're here, does Allah, I don't know anything anymore. As I have that conversation, as I dig deeper and deeper into why they have those doubts, why they have those questions, it eventually gets to one of two things. Either one, they've been through some really bad trauma growing up. They come from an abusive household. They're going through some emotional trauma. A parent is blackmailing them. A parent physically abused them. They've gone through sexual abuse in their childhood, etc., etc. That's one source. They don't have a stable sense of self. They don't have a stable kind of feeling of who am I, what am I worth, etc., etc. The other source is weak spirituality, and so a lot of these doubts are on things that they've had a firm belief in their entire life, but on rational grounds, not blind belief, not blind faith, on rational grounds. But it's at that time when they stop praying Fajr for 3 weeks in a row. They stop coming to Jummah a couple of weeks. Maybe they go to the pub with a couple of friends, and they don't really mind people drinking around them, and they feel a bit comfortable. Like, what's wrong really with people drinking? And that's when it begins. It's the deeper connection with Allah, with God Himself. When that begins to wane and weaken, we have to realize that yaqeen, or certainty, us holding something to be true, is not purely an intellectual reality. It's not something that we just read a statement like, yeah, that makes sense. It's also a spirituality that comes into it. And we know, like we discussed this, about the Prophet's companion Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, God be pleased with him. When some companions were describing him, they said, why was he so special from all the Prophet's companions, or why was he given the place he was given? They say it wasn't except because بِشَيْءٍ وَقَرَ فِي قَلْبِهِ, to translate the Arabic, because there was something certain that settled into his heart. There was a spiritual conviction that gave them the strength to be able to face anything in the path of God. And so when that spiritual conviction, I'll give you an example. Like, if you were to ask, if you go to Desert Arabia, you ask a Bedouin Arab, like, why do you believe in a God? He won't be able to give you the Kalam cosmological argument. But he's like, this is the most certain thing in my life. I've experienced God. I have a just feeling. I have a spiritual connection with Him. I felt Him in the last third of the night. I felt, obviously, that's not his only reason, but it's an additional, it's a component of his belief that's unshakable. You can't move him. And it's that very thing that makes him, if someone comes and offers him a bad deal, if someone, makes some money by doing something unethical, he's like, no way. My sustenance comes from God. It's that unwavering, unshakable faith that's not purely based on rationality, but also based on a spiritual experience. So when that I've noticed, for example, in a couple of students, they had exams in Ramadan. Okay, student X, let's say Muhammad. He had exams in Ramadan. He thought, this year I'm not going to fast. I'm sure there's a fatwa out there that lets me break my fast due to exams. Finds his fatwa, does his shopping, decides, I'm not going to fast this Ramadan. And that's the first, that's the first step towards almost kind of breaking away from God, from his relationship with God. It's his first disobedience. It's his first willful rebellion, and his first kind of feeling of, I don't really care what God wants of me. And as the days go by, his heart grows harder and harder. Reminders from the Qur'an, Friday sermons are things that he doesn't want to listen to. Prayers become difficult. So he's so busy studying, he thinks, I'll just pray later, I'll pray later. He just stops praying altogether. This is an actual story. A guy who's a regular in the mosque, kind of very visibly practicing religious Muslim, but it was one domino after another. And when he stopped his religious practice, simultaneously he lost his religious conviction. People don't see the relationship. They think one's intellectual, one's spiritual. No, they're all linked. It's a web. And so, to summarize, like the two sources are psychological, having a stable home. That's the onus goes on parents to keep that in check, and then the other being the spiritual.
Yes.
The relationship with God, acts of worship, words of remembrance, the morning and evening. Even the Qur'an, for example, we know that the Qur'an is therapeutic. Shifa'un linnas. But how is it therapeutic? I've had an experience where I had a student that had kind of serious doubts in God. Does he really exist? Is he really? I don't really know anymore. And rather than providing him with an argument, I recited verses from the Qur'an and translated them, reaffirming who God is, his own introduction to himself. Ayatul Kursi, the verse of the throne, for example. And he started crying. He broke down into tears, and he was sobbing like a child. And he said, "It's like I never knew. It's like I never knew this before. It's like." And I know this particular person, he'd read a number of books to try and find the truth. He had a philosophical excursion, and none of that brought him conviction. It made him go round in circles until I came and I recited to him, Allahu la ilaha illa huwa al-hayyul qayyum. Allah, He is the one God. There's none worthy of worship, none worthy of devotion but He, the ever living, the ever subsisting. And that's it. He just broke down. And that's the nature of the Qur'an. So that's the spiritual cure for intellectual problem.
That was quite moving. So what we can say from that is that there is a combination of intellectual and spiritual components, and therefore we have to have a holistic approach to these issues, because sometimes, unfortunately, in the social media, everyone is on this kind of intellectual arrogance flex. Here's a question, I have to answer it. And that says a lot about us and about our own tarbiyah and our own disposition and our own alignment with the psychological approach of the Prophet ﷺ, because not every question requires an answer. Not every intellectual question requires an answer, because sometimes it's a symptom of an underlying cause. I remember, I had this Pakistani atheist come up to me at one university, and he basically said that I did a master's in quantum physics, right? And I was like, okay, fair enough. But then he asked me this. He didn't ask me a question. He said, your argument for God's existence doesn't make sense because causality doesn't make sense outside of the universe. Now, look, I have a philosophical kind of understanding. I could have given him the Kantian argument. I could have given him, expose his philosophical presupposition that he believes that causality is derived through experience. But I could have turned the tables on him, but I didn't. What I said is, what do you mean by causality? And if you study Western metaphysics, they haven't ironed out what is the nature of the causal link. So he basically ends up saying, I don't know. And then I said to him, isn't it very interesting that you're using a key word in a sentence to deny God, and yet you don't know what that word means? I said, what's up, bro? So I tried to connect with him, sat him down, and you know what he said to me? He said, I didn't know how to connect with Allah. I didn't pray properly. I didn't know how to connect with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I'm paraphrasing the story, of course, it was a while ago. But that is quite telling. Another example, I was in my town, Someone says to me, I saw your debate with Lawrence Krauss. It was a great debate, but I'm still an atheist. Do you know what I said to him? I said to him, how's your parents, bro? And he spoke to me for a few minutes talking about the kind of darkness of his upbringing from what I remember. So his kind of atheism or rejection of Allah didn't have anything to do with the question itself or his kind of new identity or any kind of intellectual question. It was probably to do with some kind of psychodynamic element. There's a really interesting article, I believe. I forgot the name of the author. It's on Yaqeen Institute, and it's about doubts and parenting. And the author, she cites a really good reference on, you know, the parents not telling their children what to do concerning religious matters, but not following it themselves, can be a source of doubt later on in the upbringing of the child, or when the child develops into being a young adult. So I just wanted to give those examples because you're actually right. Which leads me to another question, which is,
well, I just want to say something about that one thing, Hamza. Sorry to interrupt. On that thing about the, I would say in terms of if the home is one of the largest factors giving people serious doubt in themselves and in their beliefs. In terms of the home, one is obviously the broken home. That's probably the worst, kind of has the worst effect. But also hypocrisy. The hypocrisy of a parent. A child may observe it and not say anything about it, but it's perhaps one of the greatest causes of their confusion in life later on. I remember like teaching in a small supplementary school, and I'm teaching the kids something, praying 5 times a day, wake up in the morning to pray, and one 6-year-old puts his hand up. He says, well, I tried waking up for Fajr, the morning dawn prayer yesterday, and my parents said, go back to sleep because you've got school. The parents come on a parents' evening. They say, my son's learned everything. He knows this stuff. Why are you teaching him the basics? I say, come here. I asked him, so-and-so, what is it that I taught you about the 5 prayers? He goes, you taught me blah, blah. I said, what? Why isn't it you weren't able to practice it at home? And the parent's face was red. And the parent knows, I said that then and there to the parent, you can send him to the best supplementary school in the world. But the first school is you. You are the first school. And his stability, sense of safety, happiness, understanding of right and wrong comes from your practice. He can listen to me all day, but he's going to follow your footsteps. I just can't emphasize it enough. The importance of holistic parenting.
So here's the big question now. From your experience, how do you deal with these type of doubts?
Yeah, there's an interesting thing that is multifaceted, but it always depends on the source. You need to know, for every man chopping the leaves of a tree, there's one person hacking away at the roots. And so we have to be the guys hacking away at the roots. What is the root cause of your problem? Right? And that requires people who are able to converse with you and get down to the bottom of it. It could even be a family friend, a friend, just able to talk it out with someone to say, perhaps my issue is really about my childhood trauma and I need to go to a therapist, or I need to understand more about how Islam talks about how to deal with adversity. What is God's plan? How does it work? How can I understand my past? One of the most beautiful examples of the Qur'an is that when God gives Musa, the prophet Moses, prophethood, he gives him the task, the mission of prophethood, of being a messenger, kind of the ambassador of my message. God first explains to him his own past. His first reaction to God saying, you're a prophet, is, Inni akhafu an yukadibun, I'm scared. I'm scared they're going to reject me, they're going to kill me, XYZ. And God then explains to him from his childhood what God did to him. How his life, perhaps from an outsider's perspective, perhaps a traumatic set of events, being thrown into a box as a baby, growing up with a serial abuser, dictator as a father figure, killing someone by mistake, being exiled from it. It's a traumatic, it's not a normal way to grow up. But for God to say that all of this was for a reason and let it make sense to him. And then when explaining that to him, God then says to him, وَاصْطَنَعْتُكَ لِنَفْسِي, I did all this because I chose you for me. I chose you to serve. All that trauma, that difficulty, that murder, all this stuff was for me. So you don't be worried. You don't worry about it. اذهب أنت وأخوك. You and your brother now go. And with that sense of understanding his past, he's now able to go. His fear is gone. So that getting to the root, if it's an emotional cause, if it's you don't understand your past, you've been through some difficulties, understand your past, deal with the root. However, there's some specifically with the intellectual questions. Sorry,
Sorry,
go
I
ahead.
just want to add which I think is very powerful, and I mentioned this I think a few weeks ago.
Mm,
Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying to Musa alayhi salam that this is the correct meaning associated with the events in your past.
mm,
Don't
mm,
give it your meaning. And one
mm,
of the beautiful things of trauma, dealing with past experiences that may have caused some suffering or have affected your well-being, even according to cognitive psychology, it's about the meaning that you give to those events. And one way of liberating yourself from the suffering and from the past in a negative way is by standing in the possibility to give a different meaning to those events.
mm,
And I always say to Muslims, allow Allah to give meaning to the past. Don't,
mm,
you shouldn't give meaning to your past, because sometimes what happens to us, we have limited physical and cognitive architecture, right? We're limited beings. We don't know everything. We have limited past experiences. We're not, pure beings. We have spiritual blemishes. That is going to
mm.
become a lens in which you view your past. So you're going to be like, yeah, but they're always jealous of me, and they're always being like that. That's coming through you. You are the lens in which you see your past, and
It's
you're
from
not
the ego.
from the nafs and the ego. Even though you may feel a sense of injustice because you've been harmed, rightly so. However, standing the possibility to understand that the meaning that you're giving to your past is not the absolute truth. The meaning that's true is the meaning that Allah gives. And usually,
Mm,
when it comes to these scenarios, Allah gives us this kind of new realm of possibility to understand our past in a very powerful way. Just like the way he spoke to Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, right? That Allah has not forsaken you, right? You were an orphan. Look, who took care
mm,
of you, right? Who guided you, right?
mm,
And this for me is something that is neglected in that kind of dealing with Muslims, especially concerning the doubts. We say, yeah, it's
mm.
so bad that happened to you. Fine, we should have empathy, but we should
Yeah.
empower them positively with empathy and to say to them, stand in the possibility that the meaning that you're giving to your past is actually not the only meaning. Give it this meaning, give it the meaning that Allah and His Messenger wants you to give it, and you see how you become liberated.
And it's actually one of the greatest signs of what we call wilaya, the closeness to God. Some people think that being a wali, someone close to God, involves flying, some special miracles happening to you. But can you hear me properly?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. And what does the Prophet, peace be upon him, describe the signs of closeness to God? As he mentions in a kind of a tradition, kind of a divine tradition, conveying on behalf of God. He says that he sees, and I am the eyes with which he sees. God says, I am the eyes with which he sees, and I am the leg with which he walks with, and I am the hand with which he strikes. Meaning, he no longer sees from his own perspective. In another tradition, the Prophet says, be wary of the person close to God. فَإِنَّهُ يَنْظُرُ بِنُورِ اللَّهِ. This person sees with God's light, not his own. He's not got his own torch in the tunnel. He's got a massive lamp from above, football stadium light. He's able to see much more clearly. And it's something that one gradually kind of ascends to. It's not something that immediately you can do. But what is it that helps you go? One of the greatest antidotes of being able to see the bigger picture and God's perspective is reading Surah Yusuf, the chapter of Joseph in the Quran. Because Yusuf alayhi salam has perhaps the most traumatic upbringing, thrown by Joseph's brothers into a well, sold as a slave, etc., etc. And yet at the same time, what does he keep saying? What does God keep saying? Inna Allah la yudhi'u ajra al-muhsin. God does not waste the reward of those who do good. He's thrown in prison. And in prison, people come up to him saying, Inna naraka min al-muhsinin. We see you so amazing. Everything you do is just amazing. So what was the mindset that allowed him to do that? And fulfilled his dream in the end of the story. So it's again the meaning he assigned to the well, the meaning he assigned to his slavery,
Mm.
to his service, to his prison sentence. You know, we know, like people like Baba Rahman, who despite what they've been through in terms of prison and XYZ, and the way they're able to look back, and I know personally that one of the greatest reasons he's able to see with a different perspective is his attachment to the chapter of Joseph in the Quran.
Oh.
And so it's that, and um, what you're mentioning is actually, from my personal perspective, in the top three reasons that most young Muslims leave Islam: suffering
Yes.
or misunderstanding, associating the wrong meanings to suffering.
And that's why
And
sometimes
go ahead, go ahead.
that's why sometimes you'd have, Muslim students at any age, they would present intellectual questions that they could probably answer themselves if they did a little bit of reading or
Mm,
bought a book, but they still have that question as a kind of, veil that is hiding really what's happening, which is
mm,
past trauma, these past experiences, relationships, how they relate to their parents, how they relate to themselves, lack of self-esteem. So those things are very important. And the reason we're emphasizing this is because du'at, people who like to share Islam on the public domain,
mm,
this approach is not common. Like, to deal with human beings, your fellow Muslim, even non-Muslims, in a very kind of empathic way, the way of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, to imaginatively experience what they experience or feeling what they're feeling, to walk in their shoes. So, and that's why I would like to emphasize it's extremely important to engage with people that way,
mm.
because we know that answering intellectual questions is not going to create an awakening. It might do, but it could be something else. I think we had a discussion previously on the concept of Islamic epistemology. Like, what is the human being? The human being has a fitrah, has an innate disposition, and in that innate disposition is forms of knowledge that Allah is a reality and that He's worthy of praise and He's worthy of worship. But that gets clouded. If you go to chapter 30, verse 30, you go to the hadith in Sahih Muslim that's quite famous about every child is born in a state of fitrah. So the society changes him. Specifically, the hadith mentions parents, but the ulama, the scholars mention other things. So the fitrah gets clouded in a way. How do you uncloud the fitrah? Well, it depends what cloud you're talking about. Is it the relationship with the parents? Is that cloud there because of intellectual questions? Is that cloud there because someone doesn't do the afkar, the remembrance of God in the morning and the evening? Is that
Yeah.
cloud there because someone doesn't read Qur'an or do tadabbur, ponders over the Qur'an, or someone who's distant from God? Is that cloud there because of excessive sinning and disobedience and moving away from the true path? So we don't know, but the way to find out is to empathize and to question and probe and to be a human being with that person. And then you may realize, actually, I may need to use some intellectual arguments, but they need also a good relationship with the Muslim, and they also
Yeah.
need to understand their trauma in a different way. So now you've got three approaches to uncloud the fitrah, to awaken the truth within. So
But the key is that, Ustad Hamza, that it's a long-term process, or it's a process. It's the idea that some passionate du'at debating in various places have, that I'm going to give a positive, strong rebuttal or an argument, and everyone's doubts are going to disappear. Is human beings are complex. They need somebody to slowly guide, nurture them. This is the prophetic method of tarbiyah, right? The nurturing, the cultivating of a person so they can come out of what they were in and push them into a state of belief and certainty. That the idea that we shouldn't be kind of insulting to people and be so reductive to say that, here you go, here's a couple of arguments. Now, come on, let's pray the night prayer.
of course,
You
yeah, I
know,
mean, it didn't even work with me. And I supposed to have written a book about this, and I'm supposed to be some kind of so-called inverted commas leader on these issues. Even in my progression, it didn't work on me. I
yeah.
remember I used to give an answer to an apostate, and that person, from what I remember, became Muslim again. But I wasn't satisfied with the answer.
Mm,
I wasn't satisfied until I heard it from somebody else.
mm,
I was thinking, why did that happen? Well, the reason that happened is not because of the answer itself, it's because who was I when I was listening to myself or listening to the person at that stage in my progression? Was I
mm,
someone who was doing the dhikr in the morning and the evening? Was I someone spiritually attuned? Probably not. And what I noticed was, when I was more connected to Allah, engaging in the spiritual practices, the things that polish the heart, like the dhikr of Allah
mm.
subhanahu wa ta'ala, the remembrance of God. Everything has a polish, and the polish of the heart is the dhikr of Allah, is the remembrance of Allah. So, and you see, your spiritual state affects the way you even understand intellectual answers. Yeah,
Mm.
I've seen
Very
this
true.
myself. I've seen this
I've
myself.
seen it in you, Hamza. I've seen it when you come to visit our university. over the years, I've seen a 360-degree shift every year. Not every year, over the years.
I'm going around in
People have
circles.
noticed. No, very positively in the way you answer questions. Like, this is not any way to praise you, just for you to get feedback. People can feel the empathy, the spirituality, the holistic nature with which you're coming to them now,
Hmm.
and they maybe don't know the journey behind the scenes. But that the dhikr, the idea of the dhikr, what it does is relating to the fitrah, is it kind of extracts under all the rubble, that little seed of the fitrah was still there. The dhikr just kind of pulls it out and says, "Here, come along." You know, it was there, but there's so much rubbish on top. And dhikr is and dhikr is so many forms. One of the forms of dhikr is learning, studying, talabul ilm, seeking knowledge. One of the greatest forms of dhikr, perhaps one of the most abandoned forms of dhikr, is reflecting, contemplating the physical world around us.
Hmm.
This is also, we say that, oh, God says in the Quran, God's verse in the Quran. Well, these are God's signs as well. God has two types of signs: written or kind of scriptural, and He also has physical signs. But
Yes.
where are we from the physical signs? We're too immersed in our digital devices, and that's another thing with students. One of the greatest addictions of our time, even for myself, is technology. And because they are so disconnected from the outside world, they are so. Nottingham University has one of the most eco-friendly, beautiful campuses in the world. And I always ask students when they come saying, "I'm not really sure God exists. Have you been to the university lake? Have you seen the geese crossing the road? Have you tried talking to the squirrels?" No, we have a lake on campus. No, do we? So this person has no connection with nature. They've never looked at a tree and thought, how on earth did this complexity get there? They've not looked at the animals and think, look at the different types of feet, look at the different sizes. Where did this all come from? They've never had that question. So of course, if their only source of information is black and white lines on a book or videos, it's all abstract. You can get lost in your mind in circles. But the moment you see a squirrel jump up into a tree, pluck an acorn out, and you think, nah, that couldn't have been by chance. This is
Hmm.
what God says in the Quran when He talks about ulul albab, the people of sound mind, clean fitness. When they look at everything, they say, رَبَّنَا مَا خَلَقْتَ هَذَا بَاطِلًا سُبْحَانَكَ. God, you couldn't have created this for no reason. How above you are above that. How above you are. And so, is that fitrah? Ulul albab, the people of pure essence, are just people of the fitrah. People who are able to purify that seed. Yeah.
Like I remember when I was in North Wales, I was doing some camping, and at Fajr time we prayed Fajr, and I actually literally looked into the sky, and I saw an ocean of stars, layers upon layers of stars. I choked. I literally
Allah.
choked. It took me over 35 years to experience that,
Wow.
but I just choked. And I think it's because sometimes we're so disconnected from nature, we're so disconnected from the signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that it does affect the fitrah. I think there was this kind of, it's anecdotal, but there might be some research in this, that atheism has increased because of the increasing, what do you call it, synthetic lights, cities.
Mm.
There's a lot of light pollution. You can't see the stars anymore, right? So there's
Wow.
something to look into. So, okay, so that's how you deal with the kind of spiritual type of doubts. You trying to, and obviously each thing you're saying requires another video. Yeah, there's a lot to go unpack there. But as a general point, look at the suffering and the kind of, maybe the problematic relations you had with yourself and with your parents, and trying to give it a meaning that is not based on your nafs, not based on your limited understanding, but something that is more empowering, that gives you a new realm of possibility to free yourself from that past. And that meaning is the meaning that Allah wants, and the meaning that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is giving us through the various traditions. The other thing is that you mentioned was about coming close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, doing your dhikr, reading the Quran, becoming a student of knowledge,
Mm.
and also just reflecting in nature, not becoming very kind of based on synthetic stuff like technology, but be someone who's more connected to the signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So these are very important things to do with the kind of spiritual type of doubts, and each one requires unpacking, which we may have to bring you again to unpack each one. What does it mean to become a student of knowledge? What does it mean to do your dhikr? What does it mean to, try and give a different meaning to your past, to stand in the possibility to attribute different meaning to your past rather than the negative meaning or the meaning that is not empowering and the meaning that doesn't give you a sense of, liberation. Sorry, Siri's talking to me, the technology. So yeah, so we'll have to unpack that another time. So let's now move on to the intellectual type of doubts, because you had an interesting point here, and you know what, you made me think about this, because I mentioned this to some of the brothers, and I was like, I spoke to Shaykh Hisham, and he basically, I'm going to introduce it, and I want you to unpack it in detail. He said, don't focus much on the questions. And in our conversation, I realized something. If people watching public intellectuals, because we have a responsibility as du'at, as people who want to share Islam, people who are on YouTube, the responsibility has to be one of a genuine commitment to the well-being of people who read and absorb and watch your material. And that genuine, sincere commitment to their well-being must be thought about in a deep way. And you may have to come to the conclusion that it's not about answering all the questions, because why? If you answer all the questions, what have you assumed? That there's going to be another question that may, in the future, possibly, that may be a source of doubt. And the solution to that question is not them, it's you. Right?
You made them dependent, right? You created a dependence.
You awakened that in me through our conversation. I was in the car on the side of some due carriageway, right, or something. And I was thinking to myself, that's so powerful. That is so deep, because don't get me wrong, we have to answer questions as well, but it has to be done in a way that's empowering, that takes the person on the journey so they can become their own intellectual and spiritual leader in their own way. Yes, we still have to have ulama, and we have to be at their feet and study with them and all of that stuff. But generally speaking, you must have some kind of sense of stability rather than waiting for the next da'i to answer the question on YouTube so we could be satisfied.
The thing is, they don't have access to you guys as well, right?
Agreed.
On campus, there are maybe between 500 and 1,000 Muslims. Most of them don't have access to me, and I'm their dedicated chaplain. So, and then they have access to people like, imams and mashayikh, perhaps in their local masajid, who, when they come up with their questions, they're like, just go away. Don't ask these questions, right? So they don't have access to you. So all they have access is to Ustad Hamza's videos, Brother X's videos, this person's videos, and they watch them one after. And I know personally, perhaps without fail, every student I've spoken to who has had doubts, have been watching your videos.
Oh my God.
And may Allah, and you don't know the reward Allah gives you from them. May Allah give us sincerity, and may Allah accept every tiny thing we do for Him. Yeah. But then they have a dependency now on you. They need Hamza. Now I have a question Hamza can answer. Where is he? Yeah.
So one thing that we have failed, myself, the famous speakers, people who who have huge YouTube channels, people are involved in this area of work. And massive failure is not creating leaders. And what I mean by that is not a leader that they're famous, but that they could take leadership over their own life and over their own kind of intellectual spiritual certainty, where they don't have to wait for the next YouTube clip for a question to be answered, but they have a solid foundation and grounding that they can distinguish between questions that are nice to have answered, but they don't really fundamentally undermine my spiritual intellectual well-being, and questions that need to be solved, and I now have the tools and I'm empowered to walk on that path to try and solve those issues myself. But what we've done, we've created this kind of crazy celebrity type of dependency on speakers and YouTube. When's the next question? When's the next answer? And that kind of narrative has created a social construct that keeps us dependent on those people.
Yeah, the analogy was almost, how we deal with healthcare in the West. A lot of people, every little flu, I have to see the doctor. You go to the Eastern traditions, it's very self-service. Oh, I'll make this soup. I've got this mystic powder that goes into this water. I'll take care of myself. It's also akin to the idea of creating first aiders. Doctors can't do everything, but the first aider is able to deal with certain emergency incidents.
Yes.
to create people who just have some basic principles with which they have the mindset of being able to deal with their own doubts and helping even their immediate circles.
Absolutely.
We need 100,000 of those first stages, intellectual first stages.
So how do we deal with this? What do we do? You have an approach. So what's your approach to this? The kind of intellectual stuff.
So when I talk to university students and in some presentations to Islamic societies, I offer like a kind of a process of how to deal with the doubt. The first one is to assess something in Arabic called Raddul Mutashabih ila al-Muhkam, to um, link something you're doubtful about back to this kind of basic principle you're very sure about. So, say for example, let's take an analogy to make it clear. You're not sure about, say for example, why did the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, do X, Y, Z? Right? You question it. Why did he do this? It seems a bit unjust. Now, this is a question mark, right? You're doubtful about this. But what are you absolutely sure of from your upbringing, from what you've read, from what you understand, is that the character of this man, Muhammad, peace be upon him, is exceptional. By the witness testimony of his own friends, by those of his foes, by non-Muslim intellectuals, everyone just testifies for this man's character. What I'm absolutely sure of is he was an exception. He had an exceptional character. What I'm not sure of is this little incident. So I will find an answer to this incident eventually, but I am still sure about his exceptional character. And
Hmm.
until I find overwhelming evidence that that is false, I'm not going to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I'm going to find an answer to that question. Inshallah, I will ask, because فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ الذِّكْرِ إِن كُنتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ, as God says, ask those of knowledge if you don't know. I will ask. But first, I have to reassure myself. I say that's the first step. Reassure yourself of your fundamentals, your foundations. Maybe you realize I don't have foundations. There's a crisis there. Maybe we have to revisit, maybe we have to go back to the Quran. For example, Surah Qaf is one particular chapter of the Quran. I recommend for those who feel like they don't really have strong foundations of belief to go back to God Himself proving His own existence, the day of resurrection, etc., etc. Simple arguments that appeal to your basic human instinct. So set the foundation if you don't have one. But then always, whenever it rains, get under your shelter and reflect. What do I know to be true? All right, this thing I'm not sure about. One thing I am sure: for 1400 years, someone has come up with this question and there is an answer.
Hmm.
But I'm not going to throw the baby out with the bathwater. That's
So
the first principle.
that's based on the prophetic principle, which is really an usuli principle, right? Which is to not allow doubt to override certainty. So you focus on what's fundamental. So you can apply this to anything. For example, why is there hellfire? Why is hellfire eternal? You have all of these questions. Well, what are we certain about here? We are certain
God's
Allah
justice.
is Al Hakim. He has the
Mm.
totality of knowledge and wisdom. Allah is Al Alim. He's the all knowing. Allah is the most just. He is Ar Rahman, the intensely merciful. He's Al Wudud. He is the loving. So we know that's the case. So just because we've been able to answer a particular question concerning, for example, eternal punishment, does it
Yeah,
undermine what we know to be true? All it
yeah,
does, it shows our own epistemic limitations. And we're like, I
yeah,
could probably get an answer. And that
yeah.
helps you shape your journey, or it allows you to continue your journey to find an answer in a way that doesn't undermine the foundations, right? And
And
that's why there's
to
a
be
big mistake.
comfortable with that question as well. Sorry to interrupt you, sir.
Yeah.
One thing I just wanted to say: when you have a question, to remember that there were prophets in the Quran that God mentions having apparently questioned God. When Ibrahim, the Prophet Abraham, says to God, "Rabbi arini kayfa tuhyi al-mawta," God, show me how you resurrect the dead. God says, "Awala tu'min?" Do you not believe? Have you not got faith? قال بلى ولكن ليطمئن قلبي. I just want to find contentment in my heart. He wants زيادة اليقين. He wants to up
Mm,
his level of faith, because
yeah.
seeing is not the same as believing. So being comfortable that I've got a question and it's just going to increase my kind of belief, my foundation.
Very interesting point. So if you see asking questions from that perspective, it's not about becoming certain, it's about increasing my different levels of certainty, because in the
That's right.
Quranic approach to this, there are three main levels of certainty. You have ilm al-yaqeen, which is the yaqeen of knowledge. You have ayn al-yaqeen, the yaqeen of seeing, and the haqq al-yaqeen, which is it's part of your own reality. Meaning, say someone tells you via text and you trust them that your next door neighbor's house is on fire. That's ilm al-yaqeen. I walk outside of the door and I look at the house is on fire. That's ayn al-yaqeen, the yaqeen of seeing it, right?
Yeah.
And the haqq al-yaqeen is that I'm in their house and it's on fire and I could feel
Yeah,
it,
yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah,
This is all forms of certainty, but different levels of certainty. So that's a
yeah,
very beautiful way of seeing it. Like you have yaqeen, intellectual
yeah,
spiritual conviction. I'm just increasing the levels of my conviction through these questions if I have these strong foundations.
yeah,
So this is why it's so important to keep on reinforcing the foundation so people could anchor off that. And when they deal with these questions, they'll be like, well, I know what's certain here. I can continue my journey to increase that certainty rather than trying to find certainty itself, right?
mm,
This is why the problematic nature of always trying to answer the questions to someone who doesn't have the foundations would create that kind of vicious circle of doubts and even maybe traumatic spiritual experience of not being to find their space and their place in the world and this existential anxiety. So tell us more about your foundational teachings, because I want to talk about you now and link this whole doubts things to what you do in your public work. Recently, you had Quran 2030 or 3030. What was it called? To tell us about that and tell us about this new course that you're developing, bite size. Tell us as well about the other things that you've been doing to create those foundations for the Muslims, so they're able to basically start from a position of certainty and then start increasing their certainty.
sure. So I've been in my chaplaincy work, I've been constantly perplexed by the level of doubt that I'm seeing. And the level of serious doubt, people leaving the faith, people just kind of completely losing hope, people dropping out of university, etc., etc. And the last year has been playing on my mind, what's the solution? What's my solution? Is my solution to give them a few answers to their question? Is, well, I'm not teaching the man to fish, I'm giving him fish. And if he's coming back hungry for more, he's going to be hungry. He's got a hungry belly. So what I eventually did was I thought someone needs to be able to set up these foundations. And given the university students with the attention span of a goldfish, they're always on their phones, it needs to be bite-sized. You know, I remember once like telling a student to go and watch a certain speaker's seerah videos in order to answer some questions about the Prophet Muhammad. And he immediately went home and messaged me and said, bruv, the video is 2 hours long. I can't do this thing. So this is the language, that's where he's at. I'm sending him something where I'm at. I could probably watch that 2 hour video and I'd enjoy it, but he's not there. So the idea of creating a platform of bite-sized education and also creating a foundation of knowledge. So what I talked about, if you don't have your foundation, set this foundation. So in Ramadan this year, as everything went offline, I tried to just create a small online course for my local university for the Islamic Society. And I called it Qur'an 2020, 20 surahs in 20 days. It's at the moment the website is in development, but it's called inshallah it will be called rootsacademy.co.uk.
Okay, you
Roots,
had something else that you did, the 2020. It's
yeah, Quran 2020. It had a. If you want to visit the course, you can visit bit.ly/Quran 2020.
okay. Let me just find
bit.ly/Quran 2020.
it.
So 20 minutes a day for 20 days, you learn the meanings of 20 surahs. And my goal is, through God's words Himself, learn the nature of who He is. Qul huwallahu ahad teaches about who God is, for example, but with a direct relationship with the Quran. And I just made it for my local Islamic society, and then I just posted it on my timeline, and the next thing I know, 3,500 people across the world have signed up. So I
Subhanallah.
realized that there's a
So,
demand, there's a need.
sorry, Chef, give me so it's bit.ly.
/
Yeah.
Did it work? Quran 2020, did it work?
No, it went to Mac Waterloo.
Try 2020 Quran.
Okay.
This happens when you're not set up.
Perfect. Okay, good. So what I'm
There
going
we
to
go.
do,
Yeah.
I'm going to share
bit.ly/2020 Quran.
my screen. Uh, there you go.
The idea is that you start to get a structured course, 20 videos.
There you
You've
go.
got
Can you see it
multiple
now?
choice questions.
It should
Yeah,
be
yeah,
on
we
the
can see it.
Roots Islamic Education, Quran 2020, build a foundation in studying the Quran's meanings, enroll for free, well researched, testimonials, and you're going to have your other stuff on here, right?
Yeah, the idea is to build 6 courses that teach one subject, one standalone subject, 15 minutes a day in 20 days. So the seerah, the life of the Prophet, peace be upon him, 15 minutes a day in 20 days. Each course will come with a designed workbook where you can work through in your own time. Each video has quick multiple choice questions, reflection prompts. You can write your
Wow, you got
reflections.
Dr. Sajid Umar saying good things about you. That says it all.
Uh,
Alhamdulillah. So,
Possibly
Sheikh,
under gunpoint, but we love him.
mashallah. So, your stuff's going to be on here. So, it's going to help build the foundations, which is going to basically deal with the kind of. Let me just stop sharing the screen because it's going to this infinite
Yes.
loop. So, that's brilliant. So, people can access that. You said how many students registered? 3,000, you said.
About 3,500 students from about 30 countries. No
Now,
marketing, just word of mouth. Yeah.
let me tell you what that means. This is phenomenal. I have never
SubhanAllah.
in life had anyone register on my webinars that many people. And I'm supposed to have like thousands of people following me. Now, what does this mean? This means a few things.
It,
Number one,
Partly Ramadan. Yeah, go on.
no, it means number one, there is a need. Number two, sometimes maybe the way we communicate is too high level. We need someone to break things down further. Also, what it means is that there is people need a resource to deal with these questions, and it also means that YouTube is not doing it. That we need to empower, and we need to basically create material. I know many other people are doing it. Many institutes, they're doing great work, but that face-to-face empowering, that is so important. And that's how you create future leaders, and that's how you create people who have those strong foundations. Because reading an article, watching a video is just not enough. You have to go through a process. And this for me is like the sunnah of the Islamic tradition, if you like. It's the sunnah of Allah that you sit with someone. And I always say to people, Wallahi, you're going to learn from someone that you can't learn from a piece of writing or just by listening to a video. When you go through that process with someone, something happens, and it's like almost divine unwritten law. And we see this. Who was the Shaykh of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam? It was Jibreel alayhi salam. Who was the Shaykh of the Sahaba? The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The Shaykh of the Tabi'een. It was the Sahaba, and so on and so forth. We need to have that connection to our tradition in this kind of lively, dynamic way. Even if it means doing 15 minutes a day for 15 days or 20 minutes a day for 20 days, something happens to you. And we've seen it. It doesn't always work. YouTube doesn't work. Just reading a book doesn't work all the time. You need someone to take you on that journey, which is part of our Islamic tradition. Not only part of Islamic tradition, it's part of a universal law concerning acquiring and internalizing knowledge. Not just knowledge, but changing your state of being. Because you can't change how you relate to yourself and relate to others and how you relate to Allah just through knowledge. Knowledge doesn't give you access to being. And what I mean by knowledge is abstract knowledge. I repeat, knowledge doesn't give you access to becoming, to being.
I'll share a quick, beautiful story, Hamza.
Yeah,
there was a particular brother he was a student of knowledge and everything, but he completely took a 360-degree turn. He lost all faith. And he was mostly learning through YouTube lectures, taking notes, memorizing, trying to study, very kind of eager to learn. And he was having serious doubts. He was like about to just forget it all and leave. And I took him to meet one of my teachers, not in this country, in a Middle Eastern country. And we prayed Salah together. He said, fine, I'll just pray this time for you. We prayed Salah together. And then we both watched as my teacher prayed Salah. And wallahi, I saw tears in his eyes, and he said, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa anna Muhammadan Rasulullah. I just said, what are you doing? What do you mean? What's going on? He goes, I saw God through this man's eyes. I just saw God. That experience, just seeing the certainty, the way this man carries himself, his conviction in God, I've seen him. He exists. And it's strange. You might think like it's strange, but it's an unspoken reality that knowledge should be taken person to person. Obviously, online doesn't give you anything of that nature, maybe 1%. But we'll take 1%. We'll take what we can in this day and age, especially under lockdown and things like that.
Yeah. Look, this is not a way to belittle what's happening. It's just to show that we need to be a little bit more intellectually and spiritually mature to take our dawah to the next level, to make people understand it's not about producing content all the time. Like we've become like a Chinese clothing factory or something that we're just spewing out these items. It's not just about content. It's also the means. It's also the medium of delivery and the interaction with another human being, as someone who's more learned than you in some way. So it's very
The
important for us
vision
to.
behind the course, I'm sorry to interrupt you, Habibi. The
Yeah,
vision behind these set of courses is that, inshallah ta'ala, if Allah gives us tawfiq, that by October, these 6 courses will be ready. Seerah in 20 days, Islam's intellectual foundations in 20 days, 20 surahs in 20 days, etc., etc., six. And they will run every year from October to June in the student timetable, with the breaks for exams, with the commitment of only 15 minutes a day and one live session for you to, there'll be discussion, chat. Students can email the instructors at any time to get reassurance, a listening ear, anything they'd like. And it should be, inshallah ta'ala, it will be, if I can have anything to do with it, it should be free of cost completely. Targeting the 17 to 25 age bracket in terms of the way the content is delivered. But that is no reason someone older or younger can't benefit. So that's inshallah, hopefully, what I aspire to deliver with the help of a very committed team in October.
Inshallah. Okay, we've done over an hour, so we have to close it here. What we're going to do is, there's so much here that we've mentioned that needs unpacking. Yeah. So what we'll do, we'll bring you again shortly, inshallah, and we'll unpack some of these key concepts, how to deal with the spiritual doubts, the intellectual doubts. But for now, I'd like to thank you, Sheikh, for giving us your time, because time is the most precious thing. You know, if I said to you, you had 1 day left to live, and in order to have another 10 days, you have to give me all of your wealth, you would throw all of your wealth at me in order to have just another 10 days. And that just goes to show how important time is, and we forget. You know, if someone breaks your mobile phone, you go crazy. But if someone takes 1 hour of your time, it's not a problem. We've lost the plot, right? So may Allah bless you, Jazakallah khair, for the opportunity, and for everyone watching. There's lots that we mentioned. We're gonna unpack them, inshallah. So may Allah bless you. Any final words from yourself, Sheikh?
Nothing, just to thank you, Hamza, for the work that you do, and not to underestimate your own work and how much it's helped the students I've dealt with. So may Allah reward you. Thank you for having this conversation. I never dreamed we'd have this conversation, but may Allah reward you, and may Allah help those who are struggling and those who are finding it difficult. And if anybody wants to have a conversation, anybody wants to offload what they're going through, wants to have a discussion, inshallah ta'ala, my email address or my, if you search Hisham Jafar, you should find my public page. Feel free to message me, and we can have a discussion, a holistic discussion, inshallah. Always happy to have.
Please go to Hisham Jafar Ali, the Facebook page. You can contact him there. And if you have anything that you want to deal with in a holistic way over a period of time to create those awakenings, he's your man, he's your chef, and Allah bless you. Take care, guys. I'm going to do another live in a couple of days, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.